There you go.
Hello, well my name's Dave Burland and I've been very fortunate, we're very fortunate today with the wonderful weather we haven't, and an old, very old friend's dropped in to see me, which is always nice to see somebody when you live a bit out of the town anyway, like I do. So it's Tony Wilson.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic to be here.
And what, just tell us, I mean I've followed your career for a sort of sketchily, whatever I can, but what are you up to at the moment?
Well, at the moment it's almost like I've had to reinvent myself. For the last 20 years I've been telling stories in schools, travelling all over the world. I've been to something like 2,000 schools in 20 years. And then unfortunately budget cuts have really stopped schools from having the money to book me. And now I'm returning to the folk scene.
Right, right. And do you anticipate any problems with that? Because people still the cachet of your name still carries on, doesn't it?
Well, I think really, I mean, with it being 25 years plus since I ever toured all the time, I think people have not exactly forgotten me, but they're quite surprised when I turn up.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not that case of like, didn't you used to be Tony Wilson?
Oh,
so
yes.
like, I definitely still am Tony Wilson.
And so, tell us about, just give us an instance of the schools that you did before we get on to the folky sort of stuff.
Well, I'd been a teacher. I had to stay at home, and I didn't have to, but I chose to look after the children, and I stayed at home, then became like a playgroup leader, then I was a PTA manager, and then I sort of trained, so I taught for 12 years. And so I had like quite a broad spectrum of understanding of what children needed as far as stories were concerned. So I made up the job, like we all do. Yeah. I lied and told people I knew exactly what I was doing. And then, and I made a lot of mistakes in the first year or so, but I wasn't charging people an awful lot of money, but I learned how to do it. Yeah. And then that kind of continued on right from early years, like from preschoolers up to year 10s, like pre-GCSE children. And you would go to a school and people would say, we want you to tell stories about Romans. So I would read up about Romans and then I'd make up a story which was generated by the children. And then you go to another school and they'd say, we would like you to make up stories about steel making in the Rhondda Valley. So I went to the Rhondda Valley, did some research, got loads of books, read about that, and then used the children's ideas with them on the spot to make up stories.
And how did they do this? The kids, I mean, what was their involvement? Obviously, was it like role playing, like a?
No, they'd be kind of sitting in front of me, and it would be anything from like 6 to like 350 at a time, and would say who's going to be in the story. And they would get a chance to choose. So I'd write on man, boy, woman or a girl, yeah. And I'd say where they're going to be, what are they going to do, why are they there and when. And they would give me all of the descriptive adjectives that were necessary. He was tall, he was strong, it was wide, it was flat, it was broad. So they'd see me making notes in front of them and I would instantaneously just look at this set of notes and make it into sentences.
Yeah, yeah.
So they had an opening paragraph.
But basically it was their imagination as well.
Yes, that's it.
Which is very healthy, it must be.
It was healthy, yeah. It's great. I mean, if children have ownership of the stories, then they're going to be interested. So rather than me just saying, well, I can write a story, you say a man, okay, I'm going to think about what it is, they were directing exactly what it was all the way through. So right from whether it had a happy ending or a sad ending, and they could see a story being made up in front of their very eyes within the space of, well, from the first question to me telling the story to like 15 minutes or thereabouts.
Yeah, yeah.
And the school would get a video copy of it or an audio copy of this, because having been a teacher, I was aware of what teachers needed, because they need that follow-on work. So, yeah. But it was I am not complaining in the slightest. I mean, it's unfortunate that I don't have the opportunities anymore, but it was the best 20 years of performance experience I'd ever had.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How did you go when you went abroad then? When you did, I mean, presumably you did the same thing in China and wherever.
Well, that's it. Yeah. Well, what happened was, you know how we all get these like spam emails. Well, actually, I don't get quite as many. Where they're kind of asking, so like, do you want a smaller penis and like a bigger mortgage kind of thing. Well, this thing came through and said, would you like to sort of like tour in Argentina? And I thought, oh yeah, this is really clever. This is like algorithms gone crazy. They've really worked out. They've looked at who I am and worked out that that would be something I would think of. So there was a random email that turned up, and I was just about to go on holiday, and I thought, no, it can't be. But I looked it up and followed it up because it came in on the spam.
Yeah.
And I looked it up, and it was a legitimate company. But I thought, well, I'm gonna phone the person, who was in charge, Alberto, and he was in Argentina. And I phoned him up, and he said, yeah, that'd be great, but I need you to sign a contract. And I said, whoa, like, I'm going on holiday. I don't do any of this kind of stuff. It's like, don't make a decision when you're drunk, because it's never a good one. Don't make a decision when you're jet lagged. So basically, I finally got in touch with them, and we chatted, and I saw that it was legitimate. But I that sounds terrible. I asked quite forcibly that they paid for my airfare out, rather than me put that up front, which is what they were asking.
Yes.
And I thought, this is too dangerous to put the money up. And that turned out to be the first tour that I had in Chile and Argentina, and it lasted about 5 weeks or thereabouts. So, and then I went to Brazil later in that year, because that was in the March of 2010. And then I went to Brazil, and then I've been to Colombia and Peru and Mexico, Costa Rica, Uruguay. I'm sure I've missed a few out, but we also went to China and to Korea. Now, Chinese and Korean, I don't really think I could manage those, but I've become quite fluent in Spanish.
Really?
So,
it sounds as if you've really had to do your homework, in actual fact.
Well, I've always loved. I've always loved languages.
Yeah.
My father, who was in the Second World War, came back and he could say a few words of Arabic, which I found astonishing and very interesting. So when I toured with bands on the continent, I always learned some French and some Belgian and some Dutch and German, and I lived in Germany for quite a while, so I always spoke some of the language.
But it's not wasted, any of that knowledge you've got about the, with the kids and everything, because if things did look up, you could do a bit of that as well, couldn't you?
Oh yes.
But your next project is to get back into the folk scene.
Well, yes. I mean, it's not out of desperation, but luckily, when I was storytelling, I was working with Tom McConville. We bumped into each other, and I said, why don't we do some stories together at Christmas? So we've done that for seven or 8 years at Christmas time, and then we were playing, just clarting about. I feel so Geordie. I was just clarting about, and we sort of went, this is really good, why don't we try for some folk clubs? And we did a concert in Halifax, and it went really well, and then we did a few concerts. So we're working as a part-time duo. I mean, Tom's very busy as a solo actor and with the Tom McConville band and with other like guitarists. But what we are doing is more like singing together. I'm playing several different instruments. Is
it like a show? I mean, a show in that it's more or less scripted, even if it's in your head, or is it?
No. When we're doing the stories, I would tell the stories and Tom would be playing the violin behind me, which is very mesmeric. It's really engaging for the children because the music flows, and he's very good at it. He's very good at. No, he really is. He's really good at it, and it weaves like almost like a hypnotic spell over the children.
Yeah.
They're listening to the words but listening to the music at the same time, and they find it fascinating that there's
I
two
can
men
imagine, yeah.
standing there. But when we're doing the duo in the folk clubs, this is stuff that we used to do as a duo in about 75, 76.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of a cyclic nature to this,
Absolutely,
you know.
yeah. And do you find that the folk clubs and the venues have changed much? I mean, there's obviously less of them, haven't there, really?
There's certainly a lot less of them. I think the warmth of response, especially with somebody like Tom, who's like a very charismatic performer. At first, I was quite happy to be the accompanist and maybe do like one or two songs. But what we've developed now is much more of a proper double act, which is hugely enjoyable. But it whetted my appetite. I went to go and see Tom. This is turning into all stories, isn't it? But he'd forgotten to bring a mic stand when he was playing in Newcastle, and he phoned me up and said, could I bring him one? So I wasn't intending to go to the folk club, but I got on the metro, brought him a mic stand, and the organiser was asking people, so like, do you sing? Do you sing? And he said to me, do you sing? And I went, no. It was the first thing that came out, like, no, because...
Oh, how surprising.
Well, yes, I'd sung on my own, but it'd all been in the past, like 25 years beforehand. And I think, apart from a few forays as compere, and maybe 3 or 4 songs at festivals, I'd never sung on my own in front of adults. I mean, I sang with the children.
Yeah.
I've written about 30 songs for children about writing. You know, the apostrophe catastrophe blues and oh dear, what can the metaphor be, and things like this. But it's all from a teaching perspective, that you're trying to teach children like how to use language and grammar and description, but hopefully in a remarkable and memorable way, through a song.
I agree with you entirely, because I've done it when I was playing. I did a few schools actually, and the thing I did find about it was it's such a change for kids to see something like that, to have it's a different slant on life, isn't it, when you go in and you get a guitar or whatever and you play a song for them. And I used to get them to write, a bit like you, 12-bar blues, you know. And I wrote one called the Calcium Blues, which is about drinking your milk and all, because there was this big campaign on at the time. But they wrote it as well. And I said, I used to go in and I used to say to the kids, what's your very worst thing, your most unfavourite thing? Yeah. And whatever they said, we'd write a song about it.
Yes,
that's it. It's great, because it's great motivational, because it draws on their imagination as well, you know. Yeah.
Well, that's perfect sort of kind of procedures to work with children. It's a good methodology. Yeah. It's not what I can do. I can write stories, I can write songs, but I'm not here to show what I can do in the same way as you're trying to draw from them what it is we can do together. Yeah. And that's perfect practice. That's great.
It's good. But what sort of stuff are you thinking of? What sort of format are you trying to get back into as you get back into the folk club? Are you going to be a solo singer? Because you did quite a lot of that, didn't you?
I did. I mean, I'd been in lots of different bands and in duos, but I could always fall back on the solo work. I suppose to a certain extent, the majority of what I did was almost abroad, you know, like France and Belgium and Holland and Germany, Switzerland, Italy, you know, places like that. But in between times I would come back and do work sort of on a solo basis. I think that, as you said earlier, that the folk scene's contracting. You have to do whatever you can, really.
Yeah.
I know I'm not getting 3 to 4 days a week working in schools, but as soon as I decided to become a singer again, all of a sudden, like literacy conferences and workshops and this kind of thing have all tried to book me. And I've just done like a week in Telford, and the week before that I was in Birmingham teaching teachers and things like that. And I'm thinking, like, I'm supposed to be singing now, not doing this
Well, I
storytelling
think
malarkey.
that's the joy of it, though,
But
isn't
but
it?
the whole point is, I'm lucky that I can do.
You do all that, yeah.
I can do all this.
Yeah. And how do you envisage? Well, I mean, you're back in it anyway.
Yeah.
So, and it's not as if you're unknown. I mean, all that early stuff you've just been talking about, you were doing the continent before I did it. You know, I mean, you were with Dave Bowman, weren't you, and all that, and John Doonan and all that.
Yes,
So,
that's right. Well,
yeah.
the first trip abroad was with John Doonan, and that was just hilarious, absolutely hilarious, because you know it was my first time away, and I find myself in Belgium in the red light district watching sort of like belly dancing strippers, which it's a very niche market. But you know, but playing the banjo in between the strippers, so it's it's kind of.
And is that still your sort of first instrument, the banjo? Because
I thought you were going to say, is that your first wish?
playing with the strippers.
Playing
yeah.
for strippers,
Yeah,
yeah.
yes, playing for strippers.
The trouble is, if you play for strippers, you only see them from behind.
Very true. Yeah.
No, to be honest, I think it's like everything. You know, when you're a teenager, it's very difficult to find out what it is that you want to do, and
Yeah.
you know, everybody's like saying, you know, do you want to collect stamps? You know, or do you want to? I mean, I was a very outdoorsy kind of boy. You know, the scouts and
Yeah.
you know, like climbing and like camping and canoeing and all these kind of things. And I suppose my first would be unaccompanied, because you couldn't really climb up a mountain and stay in a shepherd's hut and, you know, suddenly,
yeah.
you know, here I am in the middle of a shepherd's hut, I've got my banjo, so singing was the
Particularly
first
that
thing,
heavy banjo you had, actually.
which I've still got. And it's still as loud, but I think I play it a lot slower.
Yeah.
These are the things. I've got to say that what happened was I got a 5-string banjo, because I'd seen the Dubliners, and
Yeah.
5-string banjos were on the television with the Beverly Hillbillies and Scruggs, you know, Flat and Scruggs.
Yeah,
were
Flat and
all,
Scruggs, yeah.
all of these things were on the television all the time. Things like Hootenanny and 6-5 Special,
Yeah.
and I was a bit too young for the skiffle era. But things like Tonight, when you had Cy Grant and Julie Felix and
yeah.
Lance Percival on the television, so folk had a big profile.
It did have a big profile, and
Yeah.
nobody seems to think that. You know, they
Yeah.
think it was small potatoes, and it wasn't. It was.
No.
It was. I mean, it was reasonably accessible with the telly, getting on the telly. You know?
Yes. Oh yes.
And I did a program once with Roy Bailey, and they were talking about Mixolydian modes on the telly. Now,
Yeah.
can you imagine that these days?
Yeah. Well, maybe opening on the Open University. Were you wearing sandals at the time?
No, I wasn't wearing sandals, no. And I always wear socks with them, if I do anyway, so...
Oh well. Okay. Right. Okay. I know exactly who you are now.
So,
But I mean, this thing about folk music. I mean, it was incredibly popular.
hugely,
You know.
hugely.
What was it? Walk Right In with
Yeah.
Wally Whiten.
Yeah, yeah,
And there were the regional folk programs on the television.
they were.
You know.
They were,
So
yeah.
Melanie
There
Harold
was
had one.
I did one up in Newcastle where I sang The Streets of London, I remember.
All right.
Yeah.
I shall have to try and dig that out.
Foggy Duo. It was Tyne Tees, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were all on that. I've tried to find it, because at that time, which must have been 76, 77-ish,
Yeah,
or thereabouts, I had a Zapata moustache. I have one photograph which nobody will ever see. It was bright ginger, by the way.
Ah,
And a denim waistcoat with leather patches.
you'd look just like a Colombian footballer then, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So, but I mean, I was swept up with the way that it was. I mean, and on the radio as
And
well.
it was the alternative music of its time, wasn't it? That original sort of time slot, say from the 60s up to the 70s, was. I mean, you could go in Barnsley now and say, in a young, where there are young people, say, anybody been to a folk club? Oh no. But you go into where there's older people,
Yeah.
and they all came to the folk club.
Yes. Yeah. It was as much a social thing as
Yeah,
as a
it
musical
was.
thing, but it was a progression. There was that making music on your own. You know, people would always like listen to the crooners and Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, and there would be maybe like the odd one or two people who would play a guitar. but there was like an explosion, you know, early 50s, if you think like 52ish, there was like an explosion of people who merchant seamen would bring reasonable guitars.
Yeah, they did.
You know, and they would bring records from America, like the VJ records, and you know, and like original, you know, Presley, and then Lonnie Donegan seemed to be like the acceptable face of acoustic music. So
yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. So he really boosted it, and then there was, you know, there was a big revival.
It was. It was indeed. Yeah. There was. I mean, there were a lot of. I mean, you could work at Newcastle. There were about 6 clubs in Newcastle, I think, at one time, every night of the week.
Yeah.
So what are you sort of? What's going to be a? I mean, are you going to be a singer-songwriter? Are you going to be a?
Well, it's kind of strange. I mean, all those years ago, like before I became a teacher, I got involved in quite an awkward contract where I couldn't actually play. So that was another reason why I stayed at home and brought the children up, because I really couldn't work, because I would have to sign everything over, and like all performances would have to be sort of like halved and all this kind of stuff. So I basically stopped playing. But when that contract came to an end, I mean, subsequently, I've shown the contract to a lawyer friend of mine, and he said it's not worth the paper it was written on. So I had like 6 years of silence, and after that 6 years of silence, there was this like kind of dam that just kind of opened, and I wrote like about 30 or 40 songs and recorded them on cassette. Yeah, you'll have to look it up. And I know somebody said wax cylinders, but so I recorded all these songs on cassette and never sang them because I didn't have like an outlet, and I'd always sung traditional songs.